Stanley Manus, and I was born in Bloomfield, Iowa, 1972. I grew up in Algona, Iowa, and spent those years as a pastor's kid, and that wasn't easy because you're just kind of coined as the pastor's kid. In some phases, trying to not be viewed as the squeaky clean kid that's the pastor's kid. Wasn't sure about where I was going to go at the end of high school. I'd always had an interest in the military. All the way through high school, I talked to recruiters off and on. Didn't really know how that would look for me. I worked at a camp at Clear Lake, and we heard the speaker one year, and it just really spoke to my heart and my life, and I just felt God clearly calling me into giving my life to Him in full-time ministry and service. So I did that, and I went to Bible college, and right out of college, met my wife there, and still always had an interest in the military. And then about 10, 11 years ago, I really was kind of at a crossroad and looking where God was leading me, and He opened the door to come into the military. And I kind of thought that door had been closed, and I'd been quite a bit, pretty far down the road in my career, and so it was a totally new career path within the ministry. So that was challenging. I went back to seminary to finish a graduate degree that's required to become a chaplain, and finish some of the other credentialing that was required. So you first come in and you have a 3-month course called Chaplain Basic Officer Leadership Course, and you go through 2 or 3 weeks of what feels like basic training. So we had our basic training really kind of condensed, and then you moved into being what is it to be a staff officer and work on a staff? Because that's one of the unique things about the Army Chaplain Corps is we are embedded, we are part of the staff primary. And then moving into how does it look to be a chaplain and serve people in the Army. So it's, in those 3 phases, it took a little over 3 months to complete. I was drilling with the 168 Infantry in Council Bluffs. And so this was back in 2008 that we started hearing a little bit of rumors of maybe a deployment on the horizon. And so I was trying to finish my seminary degree quick enough to deploy with that unit. As you know, a lot of military personnel experience, you get very connected, and it's a brotherhood, sisterhood with the folks that you serve with. And I really wanted to go with them, and I didn't want another chaplain to take my place and go over to Afghanistan. So I kind of pushed hard to finish school, and I deployed in 2010, 2011 with the 168 Infantry as a part of the 2nd Brigade, 34th Infantry Division. So that was a whirlwind kind of for a couple of years, spinning up to that deployment and then going right into that deployment. The infantry really pride themselves on their military bearing being really strong and having doing things with excellence. And so that was my experience with the 168 Infantry. Great leaders. Definitely, you didn't really have anyone like walking you through things to help you understand what was going on. I mean, you're just kind of throwing in, and that's learn by doing, and to a large degree. That was new. And so no one was really going to kind of hold your hand and walk you through how a lot of this stuff works. Just get in there and do it. Building relationships quickly opened my eyes to the needs that exist, because as you start getting individuals to feel comfortable around you, you start sharing the hurts and the needs and what's going on in their lives, and you don't really know until you start peeling back the onion and understanding what's going on in someone's heart in their life. And then it was very clear there was a lot of hurt, and as an Army chaplain, it was a kind of a shift from local church or other parachurch ministries where there was maybe more of an emphasis on discipleship, and in the military there's a much bigger focus on pastoral care, soul care, coming along individuals and helping them, individual counseling. That became just a primary focus within the ministry in the military. We are considered non-combatants like medical corps or other individuals in the military. Currently, that means not even holding a sidearm for the United States Chaplain Corps. And it's a source of debate, because many chaplains feel like they should have the right to carry a sidearm like a medical individual that serves the medical corps. But it's been said for a long time that we're non-combatants, and it allows us to really focus on caring for soldiers and not being distracted by other things. Now, we do have a chaplain assistant who provides that protection and security in country. And so their job as a chaplain assistant is to take care of a lot of the things that you need help with administratively and setting things up for chapel and stuff like that. But they're also your personal security. And so that's a challenge, particularly for me. It was a challenge when I was in Afghanistan because I was traveling with our infantry battalion. I would go on patrols with companies, and we're going into villages, and we're going out on humanitarian missions, and I'm meeting with mullahs in villages and things, but it's pretty vulnerable not having a weapon in that setting, of course. After a while, you get used to it, and so I had a great assistant, and I was really surrounded by a bunch of great infantry guys that I felt so comfortable with them that I felt pretty secure not carrying a weapon. I just had a lot of trust in them individually and as trained American infantry. The hardest part about the deployment was being away from my family, no question. The deployment itself and doing what we did overseas, and even some of the things that were dangerous, I would do that stuff tomorrow. As a chaplain, I think you really, really find your purpose in the military on a deployment in particular, because you have a lot of folks around you looking for comfort, looking for answers, and walking through really difficult times. I loved doing what I did, but being away from my family was horrible. And being away from my children was, honestly, that was one of the things that kind of haunted me the most, was this idea that I'm going to be away from my kids and I'm not going to be an influencer in their lives during this time. My wife had her own struggles. She was a single mother during that time, also taking care of all the responsibilities around the house and for the home. And honestly, coming back from Afghanistan, I was just reminded how busy and complex things are. In some ways, things are really simple in country, very straightforward, everything's laid out for you, and you kind of go into the simple mode, and when you come back home, it's complex. The most difficult part of being away from my family on the deployment was met when I came home. And all the issues and the difficulties of getting reintegrated, that's, I think, what where everything kind of comes to a head for families that deploy. I mean, there's the pre-deployment, there's anxiety there's the deployment with its challenges, but it all comes to a head when you try to refit this puzzle back together again, and all the pieces are just sort of different. I was able to stay in contact with my wife and kids through Skype. Connectivity was spotty at times, and every 3 to 4 days I was traveling out to a combat outpost that sometimes they didn't have running water, electricity, so just when the availability was there. And it was a little surreal sometimes. I'd be in a combat outpost in a very austere area of Afghanistan, looking at what just feels like the moon, like I'm on the other side of the world, and this feels even further away than that. And talking to my wife who's at home, and this contrast was just kind of crazy. The natural scenery is really rough. Many times you don't see even a blade of grass, nothing green. So just dust and dirt and rock. I mean, it's a very porous, rocky environment. And so the region we were in was a high altitude place. It had mountains and a lot of rocky stuff, but the air was so heavy and unclean, just dirty, that there was always a smog and always a fog that it just, like if somebody just threw a handful of dust in the air, and for the next 5 seconds, that image was constant in country there. We had several companies within our infantry battalion, and we were the battle space owners of a district over there. My responsibility was to try and provide spiritual care for all the individuals, the almost 700 soldiers that we had spread throughout the province. So I would go to each one as often as I could. And the battle rhythm looked like every 3 to 4 days I would travel to a new combat outpost. That was usually through flying if we could. If we couldn't, it was by an MRAP and getting in the vehicle and traveling. Flying is much safer in Afghanistan because there's so many IEDs that, our province was experiencing IED explosions every day of our deployment. There's a lot of anxiety around traveling that often. But my rhythm was to go to these guys and see them at their combat outposts, and initially I would just do a round visiting the guys that were in the guard towers, the guys working in the kitchen, to see people that were actively doing something right there. And the next day I would typically do a worship service the next day and spend time one-on-one with as many soldiers as I could. And then the third day I would try to go on a mission with them if they were going outside the wire. And then the next day fly to the next combat outpost and drop in there and do the same thing. So that was sort of the rhythm. And I would then rotate back to the forward operating base where our battalion command was. And that was my main location, and I would provide a worship service there. We had a lot of people on that forward operating base, and so it was always very busy. Fortunately, I had a 2-week leave right around that time where I was starting to really feel the burnout, and was able to come home. So I went home for 2 weeks, and during that time, I tried to spend as much intense time with my family as I could, but they still had their rhythm and their stuff, and so I found myself alone many times. I'm like, this is weird. This isn't what I expected. Thought we'd be busy every minute of this, soaking in Americana and taking everything in, and it just wasn't like that. It was just much more subdued. When I went back, I flew back and went into Bagram Air Force Base, and then stayed a night there. And the next day, I had news that some of our guys had been ambushed and blown up in an IED strike, and one of our soldiers was killed, and 3 of our soldiers had been severely injured. And so that was, jumping right back into war. Immediately, I didn't even go back to my room or my place. I flew up to provide a memorial service. And so I flew up there and was there for almost 2 weeks, spending time with the soldiers and the unit. And then provided a memorial service that was joint with the Afghan army that were training and all of our force. And that was an opportunity to honor him. And in many ways, it was there for the soldiers that were right there. It was an opportunity for them to grieve. One of the young men that was blown up in that IED strike that did survive, and he was for sure, they thought he wasn't going to make it out of Afghanistan. He survived, and they said, well, he's never going to walk again. He's just so broken in so many places. And he eventually walked, eventually got out of his wheelchair. And a year later, he's using crutches, and then months after that, he's using a cane, and he just had this heart of never give up and never quit. And in many ways, I think that spirit or that attitude really embodies the American military personnel, because I really think in many ways we're average individuals, pretty average in a lot of ways, just another guy or gal, but the attitude of never giving up and striving for excellence, I think that's one of the staples within those who raise their hand and choose to serve. Today I'm able to sit down with soldiers and talk with them about their experiences and identify maybe in a way that I wouldn't be able to identify otherwise had I not gone through some of those same challenges overseas. So it's been a blessing in the long run. We flew back to Fort McCoy, Wisconsin initially, and then I saw my family in Council Bluffs for our welcome home. When you come back and you're like, the sky is blue? I mean, what? I don't even remember the sky being blue like this. And it's just beautiful, vibrant colors. The homecoming ceremony, both the farewell and the ceremony were incredibly well orchestrated, incredibly well run, the way only a military organization could run it, like really to a T, and it was extraordinary. My time in service has been the most exciting years in ministry, and it's kind of like finding yourself really aligning with what you're called to do. And I would say that that's been my experience in the military.